another misconception we get. You probably hear it all the time, but let's talk about fundraising, right? People think that fundraising, every tech company needs to go and raise a couple $1 million. Or, I mean, at what point do you not do fundraising? When is it a good time? What advice do you have for someone who thinks, oh, I'll just get what I can out and then fundraise it?
One of the reasons this is so hard is because we have sort of like, we've added all of this meaning and value to fundraising, right? Like we've sort of glorified fundraising as some sort of like goal in and of itself. Yeah, it's a milestone. It's like, whoa, this company raised all this money. Somehow they're successful. And it's like,
well, I mean, how many times here in Utah, do you hear like huge pages go out I mean, I've been a part of several companies that got big rounds of funding. Like, I feel like that's what everybody thinks needs to happen to be successful. That's a milestone of success. And I feel like that's not true.
No, absolutely not. In fact, if anything, it's kind of like saying, like, hey, we're going to build this house and we got all the materials ordered. And it's like, okay, so what, right? Like, yeah, you have all the materials. That's great. But like you still have to build the thing and it still needs to like last, through, a bunch of storms or something like that. And that's really like, you need to think about funding as, it's like adding, one of the analogies we use a lot at Prenda nowadays is when we talk about the fact that we're venture backed is like, look, all funding really does, like imagine yourself like driving, like you've got this homemade airplane that you've made. It doesn't even fly yet, but you're driving it off a cliff anyway. And as soon as you go off that cliff, it starts like plummeting to the ground and you're trying to build the engine and get it running before it hits the ground, because if you don't, obviously, bad outcome. So you start doing that and you kind of like, figure some things out. But all really funding does is like put you back at a high altitude. Like it gives you some more time to figure things out. It doesn't keep you from pointing downward. Like your trajectory is still exactly the same. And in fact, in some ways, your speed towards the ground is even faster because now you've got people that are breathing down your neck, like saying, hey, we got to get to these milestones. And if you don't, you're not going to get more funding. A lot of times you're hiring more people, so you're adding more weight to that plane. So like the velocity is like increasing towards the ground. And so all funding does is just like puts you back up and maybe points you down a little bit further, right? And so you still have the hard work of building the engine and getting that trajectory corrected so you're going the right direction, right? And
Dude, this analogy in my mind is like people are like, let's start a business, and they're just jumping off a cliff without even an airplane built. They're like, we'll figure it out on the way.
That's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is. Yep. I mean, I think it's a great analogy because
amazing analogy.
There's all this urgency. Like you've got to figure this out. Otherwise, we're all going to have to go look for jobs. You're literally building the wings and the engine like as you're flying, which means you better build them quick and iterate fast, because if you build the wrong thing, it's too late. Like you're already into the ground.
And all funding is just a stop, extend the ground a little further, or bring you back to the top, and then just drop you again. That's all the difference is.
So when do you think is the right time to get funding then?
So, and this is like, there's no right answer. Well,
before you hit the ground?
No, actually, that isn't the right time. I mean, they say the best time to raise money is when you don't have to, which is sort of, it's sort of like an oxymoron, because if you're running a company that needs venture funding, then you always need it technically. But there's one piece of advice I would give to founders that are either in fundraising or that have to fundraise is that you have to think of it as an entirely different game that you're playing, right? Like there's the game you're playing of like building something that people want, finding validation, like, getting that engine built and all of that, which is the most important thing. Fundraising is a whole different game that you have to play. And it's a lot like dating, right? Like the more desperate you look, the more people are like, I don't know if I want to hang out with this guy. And simultaneously, the more confident you are, the more people are like, oh, well, can I get in on this? Like, this is exciting. And so you have to, it's like there's all this crazy stuff happening with this airplane, but you also have to portray this level of confidence and vision that really is just like fake for the most part. I mean, not fake.
No, fake it till you make it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you're trying to convince, again, you're convincing people of this crazy future, and you've got to convince them enough to write you a check for it, right? Which is very similar to finding that technical co-founder that we talked about earlier. I think deciding whether or not you should is really important. Like early on at DevMountain, I had a conversation with some mentors that was really helpful for me, because I was sort of asking this question, like, should I raise money? And they were like, well, really the question you're asking is, should you grow? Which sounds like, well, duh, of course you want to grow. But as you take a step back from that, it's like, is this the kind of business that scales? Is this a business that should grow? Because maybe you're really happy running this business at this level, the question of whether or not you should grow is a really important question that every founder needs to ask themselves. Because I'll tell you, having done this, having grown businesses a couple of times, and seen and been part of other businesses that have grown, like there's a good chance you're not going to be happy 5 years from now, even if it goes wildly successful. How many times have you heard of people who start some sort of food concept or some restaurant, and they love creating that and they love building it, but then like they get to this level of like franchising and they just hate it? Because guess what? Like it's a totally different business than it was when you were making hot dogs for people, right? This is a totally different thing. And you got to ask yourself, like, am I going to be happy? I mean, this happened at DevMountain, right? I started off teaching classes and this intersection of education and technology. It was so much fun. And then fast forward 3 years, and I wasn't doing any of that. I was like managing people. I was dealing with problems and putting out fires. And it was a totally different job than what I had signed up for initially. And so like asking yourself honestly, like, do I want this to grow is a really important question to ask yourself. And
because what does that mean?
Yeah, what does that mean for you? What does that mean for the business? Like, does this need to grow, or is it more of like, well, this is what success looks like, is it has to be, raise this money and has to have this number of employees, and I need to be in these magazines and these publications. Like, no, none of that is true. In fact, very happy, successful people avoid all of that. And that was one of the things I learned going both through DevMountain and through other businesses is, number one, like the funding announcements seem really cool and exciting. They really don't mean much. And two, like even growth itself, there's a lot of miserable people that are running very quote unquote successful companies. And there's on the flip side of that, there's a lot of really happy people who you've never heard of and whose businesses would never make it into, a publication, but are very successful nonetheless. So I think that's an important question of like grow versus no grow. And then the funding question for me is like, again, having seen both sides of this, at DevMountain, it made a ton of sense for us not to do it, right? Like we had revenue. The very first day, all the students paid their tuition. So clearly, like we had working capital. We could pay instructors, we could pay for the space, we could pay for even like future growth and even pay ourselves a little bit. So we weren't like living on nothing, which was great because I had a family and kids. I don't know how I could have done that otherwise. So like it made sense for us. We could buy our own time. Like we didn't have to rely on somebody to lift us up. We could sort of like keep ourselves at a decent altitude because we by default generated revenue, right? And so if you have a revenue generating business, that sort of is one variable in the equation of whether or not you should raise money. Now, there's sort of like, those two graphs of like revenue generation and growth are really where like the funding question becomes really important, because there might be a strategic reason why you need to move really fast to get this out to as many people as possible. Maybe it's a unique time in history. Like let's say you started a business last year that is really unique to COVID, and there's this unique window in history. Like you need to get that out as soon as possible. And if you have a concept that's working, if you have a product that's resonating with people, they call that product market fit, right? Like if you found a level of product market fit, then your goal should be, how do we get this to as many people as fast as possible? And capital, like outside capital, can be a quick way to do that, right? It's sort of like you can inject a bunch of gasoline on the fire. You can really blow it up a lot faster. It comes with its own sets of problems and like pros and cons to everything. But that's really what capital is there for, is to accelerate something, not to validate something. What's really hard is when you're raising money and you haven't found that product market fit yet, because eventually you're just going to run out of steam, run out of gas, and not really get anywhere if you don't find that. Now, there's lots of stories where founders are able to get that next round and then they're able to make the pivot that gets them into the right place. Those are tough and they don't always happen. And there's plenty of the battlefield is littered with people that have not been able to do that. So I would say there's not generally like a right time, but there's definitely like a philosophy of, first of all, only raise money when you are in a position of strength. And usually that's when you have something working, you can show traction and you can show why it's now that this needs to happen. And also, bootstrapping it, there's a lot of value there if you're willing to move slow and grow more slowly.
Tell us about a time like at Prenda, the new company that you're at, where you've just felt completely out of your comfort zone. And then also explain to everybody what it is and like what you're doing.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll say, first of all, Prenda is, we started, and I started connecting with the founder of Prenda back in like 2017. But basically what Prenda is it's a different approach to education. It's a very student-centered, whole human, relationship-based approach to education that helps put kids in a place of empowerment in their education rather than in a place of kind of like, with what a lot of us have experienced in traditional education, which is like feeling behind or feeling like you're not getting it, or sort of like
Yep.
learning to be a really good instruction follower, rule follower versus like actually being a learner, right? It's a lot of the stuff that I wanted people to have at DevMountain, but that they came ill-equipped with because traditional education just teaches you, well, if you sit in class long enough and if you do all the right stuff, you'll get the piece of paper that tells you you're worth something, and then you can go get a job.
The grade you need.
Right. Which for the most part in today's world doesn't really work anymore. Like that's not how you achieve most things.
I didn't do a dang thing in school.
Right.
Played Clash of Clans all day.
and yet we all buy into this collective like illusion that somehow like doing that is going to bring some value in our lives. So Prenda is an approach to education, helps kids learn at their own pace, helps them really master content and become learners rather than just kind of like objects to be acted upon. And so it's been a crazy fun experience. And last year was a really crazy experience because of COVID. It suddenly opened a lot of parents' eyes to like alternative forms of education. And so there's a lot of cool things happening right now in the business, and we've grown a ton. But to answer your question about like, what am I learning or what am I experiencing? I feel like I'm at my learning frontier every single day in this company. And for me personally in my life, that's a huge driver. I think anytime when I've got burned out has been for only a few reasons. Like one reason I get burned out is because I'm just neglecting myself, and I just sort of like throw everything I have into this business, and I eventually just run out of steam. That happens to a lot of people. Another reason I get burned out or I end up quitting something is because I just don't feel like I'm progressing. I kind of hit like a wall. Like this is what happened at the consulting company, where it's like the kind of work we were doing, the kind of work I was doing, the kind of clients we were working with, it just felt like I was going to be doing the exact same thing for the foreseeable future, and that I felt like I wanted to learn and progress more. And at Prenda, I have definitely had that in spades, which is one of the reasons I'm still wake up super excited every day to do what I'm doing. Some of the stuff that I'm learning, for example, I mean, early on, everybody's kind of learning together as you're trying to find like what works and how the product's going to work and what product market fit looks like and what your growth strategy going to be and how you're sort of like magically going to keep everything together while everything's falling apart, like which fires are you going to put out today and which fires are you going to let burn. That is one of the exciting things about any early stage startup that always attracts me to that stage.
Yeah, tell us about a time you were like out of your comfort zone with that. Like when were you like, oh crap, I don't know.
I'm way over my head right now.
And how did you overcome it?
Well, you guys, I think that's actually kind of a pattern for me, is that I always sort of like sign up for something that's just a little bit over my head. And I used to tell students at DevMountain that if you don't feel like you're a little bit underwater, you're probably not pushing yourself hard enough, right? That's sort of my personal philosophy on life, I guess. Is that
I totally agree with that.
You really need to kind of put yourself in a place of discomfort as often as you can, because that's how you learn, that's how you progress. So yeah, there's been a ton of times like that, and I can definitely describe. I mean, even that first cohort at DevMountain was well outside of my comfort zone. I obviously had taught before, but I'd never tried to teach somebody how to become a web developer in a part-time class over a 13-week period or a 12-week period, and had them pay me money to do it. And so there was like, there were days where I'm like, really, oh my gosh, these guys are crazy for even paying me to do this, and I just felt way out of my comfort zone there. With Prenda, it's unique because we've grown to a size of a company where I'm leading people, or I'm in roles that I would normally expect somebody who's way more experienced than I am at that particular role to be doing that thing. And so I guess it's kind of unique because I come built with a lot of humility there, because it's like, I don't necessarily know what I'm doing, and I'm trying to figure this out just like everybody else is. And so whether I'm like over product, or whether I'm, for a time at Prenda, I was over growth, which is crazy because I've never run a growth team. I've never been in charge of that before. I've never run marketing. So it was like, okay, I'm out of my comfort zone. I'm trying to figure out how to make this work. And so yeah, I would say it happens a lot. It happens all the time. And for me, that's a good thing, because I kind of
so
yearn
it sounds
for
like
that.
You lean into it. You just kind of lean to it and take it for what it's
and you just step up to the plate, right? Like I wonder how many kids who in any sports, but like just that analogy, like, listen, I'm out of my league. I'm going to step up to the plate and swing away anyways. And I feel like that's a great mentality. Now here's the opposite side of that coin, because I know our listeners are like, man, this guy is incredible, which he is. But I want to know, and I think our listeners love to hear these stories of like, tell us about a complete failure.
Oh, totally.
And when you just kind of tell our listeners, like, listen, I've made mistakes, I failed. And then I want you to walk through what your mindset was during it and kind of what you came out with it.
Yeah. And I think like one of my philosophies is that the only like failing that really is like a failure is the one you don't learn from, right? So
Mm-hmm.
anytime you
So
walk
true.
away from a situation and you've like quote unquote failed, you should be able to look back and say, okay, so what did I take away from that? And that's, we don't just learn from our successes, we learn from our failures as well, which is why I
Yep.
think we should be talking about not only startups that have succeeded and have, gone on to do whatever, but also like the startups that just crashed and burned, because that's
Mm-hmm.
where
There's
a lot of
probably
learnings
more
come.
lessons in that than there is these successful ones. Because I mean, let's be honest, there is an adamant side of luck on some businesses.
Yeah.
They hit the market at the right time. There is, and obviously hard work, and the harder you work, the luckier you get. But at the same time, like how many businesses have failed that we could I would love to talk to Blockbuster.
Yeah.
Right. And if anybody, a founder of Blockbuster is listening, please call us because we'd love to have you on the show.
Yeah.
But like, I mean, they had an opportunity to buy Netflix or whatever, they had all these things. Like those who failed really kind of can learn a lot. But I'm curious about a failure you had went
Yeah.
through specifically, and kind of what you obviously you learned something from it, because if you don't learn from a failure, you're not doing it right.
Yeah. So I'll describe. So maybe the San Francisco venture backed one is a good one to describe. So Undrip, and I'm still really good friends with the founder, and he's a great guy, and we all just look at it as like a great learning opportunity in our lives. But we sort of had this concept, and the founder actually came to me. I was his like technical sort of person, and he did a great job of convincing me of this crazy idea. And he's a very charismatic, talented guy, and so he had a lot of skill when it came to like vision and fundraising and things like that. And so I thought, hey, this is a great sort of marriage here, because I can provide some of the technical product, chops, and he can really complement sort of the sales and fundraising side. And so that's a good team. And so
Yeah.
we got together, and we had a couple of other developers that were just some of the smartest people that I've ever worked with. It was a ton of fun. I mean, we raised $1 million in seed funding. We were living in San Francisco, just hacking away, building this product, this iOS app, and it was like so much fun, you guys. Like I can't tell you, it's some of the funnest like professional work I've ever done, because we're just like living the dream. We were in it. We were in San Francisco. We were backed by. I remember. Oh, it was so funny. It was scary before we raised the money, because it was sort of like, is this going to work? And then we raised the money, and it was like, wow, $1 million. That's so much money. This is crazy. And we went down to the
Uh-huh.
Apple store, and we bought like $15,000 worth of like equipment. And I don't say that as like we were super reckless. We were probably a little bit reckless, but we honestly like we needed iPads to test on. We needed like
Mm-hmm.
computers, because we were using these computers that we owned, which were outdated and terrible. And we sort of just like got ourselves outfitted to like actually, work and build this company. And it was like 15 grand. And it was just this like, it was such a fun experience, like going to the Apple store and being like, yeah, we need to buy 4 computers and 2 iPads. And it was anyway, it was super fun. And so we start like working on this product and releasing it. And we're finding a little bit of traction. Like people are downloading, they're having a good experience. And I don't know if there's like a moment in time where it started to go south, but really it was sort of a slow bleed, right? What we didn't do is we didn't understand how we were going to break out of this initial orbit that we had gotten ourselves into. Like we had a few hundred users. I think we even got to a few thousand at one point, and a lot of really rabid fans, but we had no idea how we were going to reach the next orbit of growth, right? And we just kept
Yeah.
believing that if we built the right things and if we iterated on the product, that we were going to reach that, and somehow it would just grow organically or virally, or we'd get on TechCrunch, or somebody would tweet about us or whatever. And we just struggled to get to that point. And there were a lot of reasons.
I was just say, you didn't like make a music video or anything for investors, did you?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I know. I'm looking at it, by the way. And if I could share my screen right now, if I could, I don't know that you're looking next to a nice, is that a Tesla? Okay, sorry, but
Yeah.
I understand. We might need to make that as that picture our headline. I'm pretty sure, Cahlan, that is you in that video. Is that you?
There's one that I'm not in, and he had a couple of like interns and a friend of his who was kind of the rap, one of the rap guys in the video, and he sent me that video, and I was like, dude, that's what convinced me that he was the right guy to work with, because I'm like, he's got
that was the moment you were like, yeah,
that was it. I'm like, he's got the guts to make a rap video to pitch for investment. Like, this is perfect, and that's not me. Like, I'm not that kind of a person. And I was just super impressed by all of that. And I got caught up in sort of the hype and everything. It was super fun.
That's awesome.
So yeah,
but what happened? So tell us. Yeah. So
we're working on
things
this.
are going in the right direction.
Yeah, it seems like we're going in the right direction, and we kind of ended up getting into this, like, I guess, like, eternal debate, which was, okay, so, like, what do we need to be building? Like, do we need to be fixing this? Do we need to be building that? And we sort of, like, we got caught in this trap of building for the wrong things, right? We were building features that were helping our users, and ultimately, I think, moving the needle a little bit on the utility and the product market fit. But we didn't really ever find the growth path. Like, what were we going to do to get us into, like, the public, knowledge? And like, if we had taken the engineering talent, which we had a ton of engineering talent, and if we had somehow been able to say, like, okay, instead of continuing to iterate on this product, let's figure out how to, like, growth hack our way into more views, more eyeballs, more visibility, maybe the outcome would have been different. I can't even say that it would have been different. We might have been building the wrong product altogether. One of the ways that I described this period in my life is it felt like we were a Ferrari in a traffic jam. Like, we had a brilliant team, super smart people. Mick was one of the most talented product/founder people I'd ever worked with. I had ever worked up until that point. And it felt like we were just waiting for something to happen, and it just never happened. We were stuck. We had this great product, we had this great idea, great team, and we were just sort of stuck in this traffic jam. So even as I say this, like, we didn't focus on growth. Even if we had, maybe that wouldn't have done it. Maybe we were the wrong thing at the wrong time, like you were talking about with luck earlier. Sometimes you're the right thing at the right time, and some things you're the wrong thing at the wrong time. I mean, I remember a moment where because one of the things we focused on was sort of this algorithmic feed where you would see Instagram pictures, Facebook posts, Twitter, tweets that were all, like, organized not by time posted, but by, like, how relevant they were to you and how liked they were by the community. And it created this whole different experience for people that was really enjoyable. And then all of a sudden, Facebook comes out with their timeline feature, and it was like, oh, they literally just took a big chunk out of our product, in the sense that they also understand that they need to make a better feed experience, and they have the user base to do it and make it immediately successful, versus we had to get people onto our platform. They had to sign up through various social networks. They had to sort of invest all this time. And I thought we did a great job of creating the best experience we could, but we had huge hurdles to overcome. And so anyway, it was tough. And we just started to sort of run into, like, this wall. And really, you reach a point where you're not ready to admit it as a team, but we were sort of dead on arrival. In other words, like, nothing was changing. We were still building. We still had hope. But, like, by default, we were headed straight for the ground. And we just didn't want to admit it. We didn't want to admit it yet. And so we're heading for the ground, like, plummeting really fast. And there was this moment that, like, will forever be, like, etched in my memory. But we called all of our current investors at the time, and we had a board meeting. And we basically said, okay, everything's going really great, you guys. Yeah, like, we're doing really awesome. We just need, like, a bridge amount of funding so that we can get ready for the next round, where we're really going to knock it out of the park. And they basically told us, well, no, was like, in not so few words, they were like, no, we're not going to give you more money yet. We need to see more growth. We need to see you hit some of these milestones first. And we were walking down the stairs from that board meeting, and I remember there was, like, we had this bust. It was like, I don't even remember who it was, like Caesar Augustus or something, but it was like this white bust of this face, and somebody accidentally bumped it, and it knocked, and it just, like, shattered on the ground. And it was so funny, you guys, because we all, like, looked at this, like, thing that fell on the ground. And nobody said anything for, like, 5 seconds. It was almost, like, symbolic of what had just happened. It was like everything was suddenly shattered.
It was the shattered is how you're feeling right now. Everybody's feeling.
It's how we all felt. It's how we all felt. And we looked at it and we're just like, oh my gosh. And for me, something clicked in that moment where I realized we're in big trouble and we're probably not going to make it out of this. And we did we tried really hard, and we made some really noble efforts, I would say, to try to pull ourselves out of it. But ultimately, it just didn't work, and we didn't have the funding or the distribution strategy or whatever we were missing. We just didn't have it. And so
it's crazy to think that you can have, like, a solid idea and be on the App Store, and the users don't just come to you.
Yeah,
it's just super, super weird.
Yeah. Said very tongue in cheek, I'm sure. Yeah, I mean, that's like, build it, and they will come. Right, is what most people just believe.
Well, and it's just funny because a lot of people come to us and they're like, "Okay, yeah, I'm gonna build this app. I'm gonna get 10,000 users in the first month. Then I'm gonna go raise a round. Then I'm gonna get 500,000 users, and in 3 years we're gonna have everyone in the world on our platform. And it's just like, that's not how it works.
Yeah.
And if it was, everybody would do it. Right.
Well, and it's sort of like saying, hey, I have this used car that's just really great and it's super rare and nobody knows about it. And the way I'm going to sell it is I'm going to put it in my driveway and I'm going to put a for sale sign. And maybe you live in some obscure suburb that nobody ever drives down. And you're just assuming that suddenly people are going to start driving down your street and looking at this car. And that might help people to realize like, oh, people don't just like drive down random streets and go looking for random cars, right? Now we have tools like Craigslist and, in Utah, we have KSL and other tools that you can list things and get visibility. But for a brand new app, that just doesn't exist. And not only that, but there's a whole current of people that are going different directions to find things that that you already currently like. Again, this goes back to the ideas are not unique. Whatever app you're building, somebody's probably using another app to solve that need for them right now. And so not only is it hard to get them to come to you, it's hard to get them to stop doing what they're doing right now and choose that you're a better option for them. And that's why growth is so hard, is because unless there's a group of people out there that just desperately need what you're doing and they cannot find it anywhere else, it's really hard to just like get people to change their habits and like what you're doing better.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So I've got a kind of an interesting question for you. You've been a part, and I would say have experienced a lot of success. How that's defined is at this point like irrelevant or whatever. But what do you think's contributed to a lot of the success you've had?
Yeah, I would define success as I've found a couple of places, a couple of times in my life where I've built something that somebody loves and finds value in, and even like to the extent that it's changed their lives in some cases. I remember some of the very first times at DevMountain, or even like further on when I would have I remember a wife, a spouse of a one of the graduates came up to me with like tears in her eyes and just thanked me for creating DevMountain and all that it had done for her husband. And I had that experience dozens of times, and that's success to me, right? Like at that point, that's why I started it. That's why I was doing it. And that was the payoff, right? Was those kinds of experiences. So that was success for me. And so, the financial part of it, like I mentioned earlier, DevMountain was always going to be a side project, and it turned into much more than that. But it wasn't like I sat down and said, how could I sell a company for X $million? Like that's not where I started. Where I started was, what do I love? Like, what do I feel passionate about? What's my calling in life, so to speak? And how can I make that into something that really benefits people? And I think for me, I think that's been one of the keys to the success that I've found is if success is really like creating value for people, then that's where you need to focus, right? A lot of people get caught up in dreaming about exits and big financial windfalls and getting big numbers hitting your bank account. There's a lot of exciting things that happen when you become financially free and independent. And there's sort of like, wow, this is crazy that this just happened. But that doesn't come because that's what you're looking for, right? If you set out looking for a big exit or an acquisition or something like that, you're probably never really going to build or have the fortitude to go through the hard times that are going to get you to those levels of success, right? It's sort of like saying, I'm full of analogies, you guys, I'm sorry, but like,
they're awesome.
It's sort of like, you get a marathon runner who just finished the Boston Marathon and you're like, isn't this so cool that you you achieve this thing and you accomplish this? Like, that's part of the motivation, but really they just love what they do. Like they love the process, they love the competition, they love the training, they love all of those things. Even when they get injured and things are difficult, they still have enough drive and motivation and passion to get through it. And I think that is honestly one of the biggest filters for entrepreneurs and business owners is when you hit hard times, which most businesses are going to hit hard times at some point. You're going to hit, a big competitor doing something, or you're going to hit, a cash crunch, or you're going to hit something that affects your company. And you've got to kind of look inward and say, am I really going to stick it out? Am I really going to go through this? Or, if I'm here for an exit and I don't see that as a possibility anymore, like I'm out of here, that usually is what separates a lot of people from kind of sticking with it and being successful versus not. But again, I think back to my original point, for me, it's always been about following what I really care about, which for me is building things that help people and that hopefully provide value in their lives. And guess what? When you provide value in other people's lives, there's like an economic outcome from that. Like people will pay you when you create value in their lives. And so that like transaction becomes a powerful thing that can turn into either success in a local sense of like, hey, I created this thing on the App Store and people pay me money to do that, and it like pays my bills, and that's super exciting. Or like I did that to the point where somebody else came and wanted to buy that from me, and we sold it to them, and that value has now been transacted in the form of an acquisition or something, right? Like think about creating value for people first before you think about creating like wealth for yourself, is maybe the way to say it.
Yeah, that's incredible. No, that's such a good advice. Basically, bring value that brings you happiness before really, and the rest will follow.
Yeah.
So just last couple of questions. Let's just jump in a time machine. Let's go back to your just graduated, right? Or really early. What advice would you give you early on at the beginning of all these startups, at the beginning of all these different directions? What advice would you give you?
I mean, it's the same advice that I give, a lot of people that come with ideas or entrepreneurs or business owners or whatever. And that's just like, just do it, right? You guys have had this experience where people come to you and say, hey, I have this crazy idea. And one of the first things I say is okay, like build it, just do it. Because not to be like a Nike spokesman or anything like that, but like you trying to bring this thing into existence is going to teach you so much more than I could sitting here and picking apart your idea, right? So let's say your idea is really great. It's going to be super hard, and you're going to build it, and you're going to learn so much doing that. And even if your idea isn't great, me telling you that is probably not the thing that's going to convince you. And if it does, you probably maybe isn't the right thing for you to do anyway, right? Like if I can talk you out of your idea, that's probably a bad sign. So like go and build it. Just like try to create this thing. And even if it is the wrong idea, which it probably is going to be, you're going to learn so much through that process that it's going to far outweigh any kind of financial success or otherwise. And this story that I shared with you guys of Undrip, like I look at that as probably one of the most pivotal experiences that I went through, because I came out of that with so much more experience. I feel like a little bit of wisdom, a few more like racing stripes. Like I had been through some things that helped set me up for success. DevMountain never would have happened without Undrip, never would have happened with the startups that came and went previous to that. So you need to have a bias for just building and doing, and a tolerance for failure that just helps you keep learning and keep moving forward. And I think that is what I would reinforce to a younger version of myself, is like, don't get discouraged if things don't work out. In fact, like just look at every failure as another stepping stone.
Well, and I think we as generally growing up, we're always looking for permission to do something.
Yep.
And I think that advice of like, stop looking for permission and start doing something.
Absolutely.
Like if there's something in your way, go do it, right? Get it out of the way. I don't need your permission to do a job. Austin doesn't need my permission to do something. We can just go out and do something. And I feel like that's such good advice.
And if your program teaches that, I am all in. Because I literally talk about that with my fiance all the time. How can we teach people not to seek affirmation and just do what they want to do?
Yeah. Well,
That's
funny. I remember a couple of times being on the other side of these conversations where I had an idea and I went to somebody who I respected and I thought was successful or whatever. And I would take him out to breakfast, or I'd take him out to lunch, and I'd pitch him my idea. And then they sort of like, oh, okay, well, cool. Are you going to build it? And I don't know what I expected, but I expected something like more than just like, oh, cool. It was like I was asking.
Great idea. Go do it.
I was asking for like permission or validation or something, when really I didn't need any of that. It was like I just needed to go do it. And that's there's this attribute of a lot of early stage entrepreneurs, which could be seen as a weakness, which is like this naive optimism, right? Like you just sort of don't understand all the challenges and problems, and you're relentlessly optimistic. And so people are like, man, that guy's going to be in for a world of hurt. Well, that's actually what helps you get into what you're doing and helps you build the thing. Because if you talk to somebody who's been in that industry forever, like for example, when we started Prenda, one of the first things I did is I went to some colleagues and friends that had been in education for a long time, like real childhood education, not adult education. And I mean real, like, state funded, like all of this stuff. And I went and talked to them and I said, tell me why this is a terrible idea. I just want to hear like all the things that are wrong with it. And almost every single one of them were so jaded. They're like, yeah, this is never going to work. Here's all the things that are going to come against you, blah, 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 blah. And I didn't really hear anything that made me believe that this wasn't possible. It was just more of like, here's all the reasons you're probably going to fail. And And even though
You're
that,
just eating it up. You're
yeah,
just eating it. You're like, yeah, give me more, baby.
even though that was valuable to kind of hear all those pitfalls and things that we could run into, it also taught me that, like, man, it's almost like the more you know about it, the less likely you are to be successful in it, because you sort of believe all these stories that it's just not possible and you're never going to make it happen.
Yep.
I mean, this is how disruption happens, right? Is like big incumbents like Blockbuster are sort of like, oh, the streaming thing's never going to work. It's never going to happen. Like, we've been in this business a long
Never gonna
time.
scale.
We
Yeah.
know what the problems are. And the next thing you know, it's like, oh, I guess we were wrong, you know?
Yeah.
So
Seriously. Well, what last parting words do you have for like these early founders and like listeners to this podcast?
wow, that may be the hardest question.
I mean, honestly, you've given so many good ones. Like even just that last one of just going out and doing it. Like there are so much gems. But anything you wanted to say, anything that you felt like you didn't, portrayed across this.
To the
this
non-technical
podcast.
co-founders listening to this, like what piece of advice do you have to give to
If
them?
they're still here during the end of the podcast here?
Yeah, I really, maybe I'll bring it back to kind of this mindset thing, which is, it's just so critical. One of the big things I've seen and sort of learned about when it comes to education or even just life in general is the way you perceive your reality and the situation around you has everything to do with what you're going to be able to make of that. In other words, if you're a child in school and you realize that really you can learn anything you want to, that's going to set you on a path for incredible growth and success in your life. If you're an adult, in my case, if you're coming into a coding school and you believe that you can accomplish this and you're going to apply yourself and do whatever you can, you're going to be successful. And if you're an entrepreneur that just is going to relentlessly like try to figure it out, and if you're going to like seek success in the right form, and if you're just going to be like have this mindset of, look, the world is nothing more than just a bunch of things that people made up. I think Steve Jobs has this really famous quote of like, everything you see around you was made by people that are really no smarter than you, right? Like we have this illusion that everyone else has it figured out and we're the ones that don't. And that's just not the case. Once you see the world as like, look, everyone is sort of like figuring out their way through this, and I can be that person too. Like I can create something that people find value from, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist. It doesn't take a Steve Jobs. It can be me. Like, why not me? That's a really powerful mindset to have.
I totally agree. I love that.
Man.
That's super awesome.
Oh, I'm ready to go take on the world right now. Golly, Cahlan and TED Talk right there. For our listeners, where can we find you? Where can our listeners look you up? Any type of content? Tell us when your book is going to release. Your biography, all of that. Just tell us. Is it just LinkedIn? Is that the best place, or what?
Yeah, honestly, LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter, but I don't post very much. But yeah, happy to connect with anybody via LinkedIn or Twitter, or yeah, that's probably the best places.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks for jumping on. We really do appreciate it.
Totally. Thanks for having me. It was fun.